We like to think we're in control, that our modern world, with its vast economies and complex supply chains, is built on a foundation of unshakable stability. But what if that whole story is wrong? What if the systems we depend on are far more fragile than we imagine? In the mid-19th century, Europe felt secure. It was powered by a single, humble crop, the potato. It had fueled the Industrial Revolution and supported a population boom unlike any before. After the horrors of the Irish potato famine, lessons had been learned. A stable, abundant food supply seemed guaranteed. But what if the greatest threat wasn't a general or a king, but something hidden? Something tiny, waiting for its moment to strike. Across the Atlantic, a creature no bigger than a grain of rice was about to rewrite Europe's destiny. No one knew it yet, but this was the first act in a drama that would bring a continent to the edge of ruin. The cause wasn't an army, it was this: a small, striped beetle. And it was about to board a ship. To understand the panic that was about to unfold, you first have to understand just how vital the potato had become. This wasn't just a side dish. For millions, it was the bedrock of their world. Before the potato, Europe was trapped in a notoriously unreliable cycle of grain-based agriculture. A bad wheat harvest meant hunger. A catastrophic one meant famine. The potato changed everything. It could grow in poor soil, required less land, and produced 2 to 3 times more calories per acre than crops like wheat or rye. For the working poor and the new class of industrial laborers, it was a miracle. It was the cheap, calorie-dense fuel that kept the factories running. Cities grew. For the first time, a real hedge against the ancient spectre of starvation seemed possible, but this miracle came with a hidden vulnerability. The ghost of the Irish potato famine, which began in 1845, was still fresh in the collective memory. A single fungus-like organism had turned the crop that fed a nation into a black, rotting mush. The result was catastrophic. Around 1 million people died, and another million were forced to emigrate. The Great Hunger was a terrifying testament to the dangers of relying on a single crop, a lesson seared into the minds of European leaders. In the decades that followed, Europe rebuilt. But the potato remained central. It was simply too productive to abandon. The continent's stability felt earned, permanent. But what no one could account for was an ecological chain reaction happening 5,000 miles away, an event that would put this entire system to the test. The source of this impending crisis lived a quiet existence, thousands of miles away, in the wild lands of the Rocky Mountains, Leptinotarsa decemlineata, the Colorado Potato Beetle. But before it earned that infamous name, it wasn't a pest at all. For millennia, it fed exclusively on a weedy, spiny plant called buffalo burr, a wild relative of the potato that no human cared for. For decades after it was first described by science in 1824, the beetle remained an obscure insect, living in harmony with its host plant. Then came manifest destiny. Around 1859, American pioneers pushed into the beetle's native territory, and with them, they brought the potato. For the beetle, this was a revolutionary moment. For countless generations, it had scraped by on the spiny buffalo burr. Now it was presented with a lush, nutrient-rich, thornless relative planted in vast, endless fields. It was an all-you-can-eat buffet. The beetle jumped from its native host to the cultivated potato, and the result was an ecological crossover event of catastrophic proportions. Free from its natural predators and with an infinite food source, the beetle's population detonated. It began a relentless march eastward, a creeping yellow and black tide that devoured everything in its path. Its rate of spread was astonishing, advancing at an average of 85 to 140 kilometers per year. The swarms were the stuff of nightmares. In massive numbers, they could strip a healthy field down to bare stems in hours. The stories from the American frontier sound almost mythical. Reports claimed the beetles were so numerous they covered railroad tracks, their crushed bodies making the rails so slick that trains would spin their wheels, unable to move forward. By 1874, the beetle had swept across the entire continent to the Atlantic coast. It now stood at the bustling ports of the eastern seaboard, where ships laden with goods constantly sailed for Europe. The invisible enemy was at the gate. But as this insect tide swept across America, one man saw the future. A brilliant and prescient American entomologist named Charles Valentine Riley. He understood the Atlantic was not the barrier everyone assumed it to be. Starting in 1871, he began pleading with European officials, warning them that the beetle would inevitably find its way to their shores and that the consequences would be dire. At first, his warnings were met with bureaucratic inertia, but as the beetle reached the coast, the threat became undeniable. Panic began to set in. A wave of protectionist legislation swept the continent. Germany, France, and other nations banned American potatoes. Europe was attempting to build a legislative fortress against a biological invader. It was too late. The first incursions had already begun. Small outbreaks were found and brutally eradicated in places like Germany and England in 1877, the authorities throwing overwhelming force at every sighting. For the next 4 decades, this became the pattern. Europe was under siege. The beetle kept arriving on ships, and authorities kept beating it back. It was a long, exhausting, and expensive war of attrition. For a time, it seemed to be working. But all it would take was one failure, one beetle that slipped through the net to doom the entire continent. That failure came in the chaotic aftermath of the single greatest conflict the world had ever known. The breaking point came in the chaos left by the First World War. The infrastructure that had once vigilantly guarded Europe's ports was strained. Sometime between 1920 and 1922, near the French city of Bordeaux, which had served as a major port for American troops, a farmer noticed something strange. His potato plants were being devoured by a striped beetle he had never seen before. This time, it was different. By the time it was discovered, the beetle had established a breeding population. It had a beachhead. The fortress had been breached. From this single point, the beetle began a new European blitzkrieg. The spread was relentless. By 1935, it was in Belgium. By 1937, the Netherlands and Switzerland. And as political tensions rose in Europe, the beetle became a tool of propaganda and paranoia. When World War II erupted, the chaos accelerated its spread. In Nazi Germany, the government became convinced the Allies were intentionally dropping beetles from planes as a form of biological warfare. The regime launched a massive propaganda campaign portraying the beetle as an American agent of destruction, the Kartoffelkäfer. Ironically, German scientists were simultaneously running their own program to drop millions of the beetles on England, a project that ultimately proved unfeasible. When the war ended, the floodgates opened. The beetle exploded across the ravaged continent, reaching Poland by 1947, Turkey by 1949, and eventually pushing deep into Asia. The small insect from the Rocky Mountains now occupied an empire of its own making. Europe had been conquered. The consequences were immediate and, for farmers, a waking nightmare. Fields that were healthy one week could be reduced to skeletal stems the next, with yield losses in some areas reaching 100%. This wasn't just an agricultural problem, it was a crisis. In a continent still reeling from 2 wars, with food supplies precarious, the loss of the potato crop was unthinkable. It brought back the very real and very recent ghost of the Great Hunger. The beetle wasn't just destroying a plant, it was threatening to trigger a crisis of widespread hunger, economic ruin, and social unrest. The response was one of desperation. Governments mobilized their citizens. In the Soviet Union and its satellite states, school children were sent into the fields to manually pick the beetles and their eggs from the leaves, dropping them into jars of kerosene. Posters on village walls depicted the beetle as a foreign invader, to be fought with patriotic fervor. Farmers tried everything from burying toads under their vines to reciting prayers, all to no avail. The beetle's incredible reproductive rate meant that even if 99% of them were destroyed, the population could rebound to its original size in a single generation. Europe was staring into the abyss. It needed a new weapon, and that weapon would come not from a general, but from a can of toxic green paint. The crisis forced a permanent change in how we grow food. It professionalized the science of pest control, giving rise to the modern agrochemical industry and, in response, the entire field of integrated pest management. It was a brutal lesson in the dangers of monoculture, forcing a continent-wide push toward a more resilient and diversified food supply. And it laid the groundwork for modern biosecurity, evolving from frantic potato bans into the sophisticated international quarantine and inspection protocols we have today. Yet, the beetle endures. It was never vanquished. It remains one of the most significant potato pests in the world, and its incredible adaptability means the arms race never stopped. The story of the Colorado Potato Beetle is the story of a small creature that held a mirror up to the modern world. It revealed the hidden fragility of our globalized systems and the profound, unintended consequences that can ripple out from a single ecological disruption. A beetle learning to eat a new plant in a field in Nebraska ultimately rewrote national laws and permanently altered the European landscape. Today, in 2026, that lesson is more relevant than ever. In an age of unprecedented global trade, the pathways for invasive species are wider and faster than ever before. It's a chilling reminder that the next world-altering crisis may not come from a stock market crash or a battlefield. It could be a fungus, a virus, or a tiny insect, a silent passenger on a cargo ship waiting for its own 1859 moment. The war that began in a Nebraskan potato patch is far from over. Its front line is now everywhere. What do you think is the most surprising part of the beetle's story? Its accidental discovery, the strange propaganda of World War II, or its incredible ability to evolve? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. But starvation wasn't the only horror our ancestors had to survive. If you think this famine was brutal, you need to see how they performed complex surgery 31,000 years ago without antibiotics or anesthesia. Click this video right here to witness the terrifying true story of the first amputation in human history. I'll see you there.